Bien, mesdames et messieurs, bonjour, ravi de...
So, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to be here with you for this session on cooperation. If we can put the slide up on the screen with our guests so that we can see who they are. During this session, we will have a part in French, part in English. You have translations.
English, so if you need a translation, you have of the tools just outside to ask to follow our debate with our attendees. Alors face à cette cybercriminalité.
And so faced with cybercrime, which we talk about so much, and we've been talking about so much over the past day and a half, we see that there is international cooperation, which I think is a key word that comes back time and time again in our discussions. We've seen some successes also internationally, which show that it does work, although obviously there are a range of responses, but this cooperation and sharing of information is successful. And then we'll also be talking about the Budapest Convention and seeing what progress has been made, what the situation is today, how things are changing. Having said that, we need to enhance, boost this cooperation because we have there's no shortage of sophistication and resources in the hands of the attackers who are more and more aggressive in their attacks. So we'll have to see how this cooperation can also be enhanced. There's also the question of the UN, where there are currently discussions, some fundamental disagreements at present, which are blocking progress on this notion of the cyber threat. And so with a level of responsibility on which the different stakeholders don't necessarily agree. And we'll be talking about that with our guests. A certain number of points we'll be talking about. And we'll also take questions from the audience. Beside me, I have the pleasure of having Karine Bannelier from the Cybersecurity Institute at Grenoble-Alpes University. Thank you for being with us. We also have Léonard Roland. Thank you also for being with us. Under Director for Cybersecurity at the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. We also have the pleasure of having Marisol McPherson here with us from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Thank you very much for being here. The immense pleasure also of having Michael Delette from Europol. Thank you also to you for being here with us, and also Jan Kralik from the Council of Europe.
If you agree, for the first question, maybe to make just some points about the digital evidence and how cooperation, international cooperation, is really, really important in this, and maybe with some let's say, useful case that we have seen in real actuality. You can have, yes, okay, you have the mic.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Melanie, and good morning. First of all, apologies, I will be probably the only speaker that will deliver the presentation in English. And yeah, first of all, I would like to state that I'm coming from the Cybercrime Division, Council of Europe, that is a secretariat to the Cybercrime Convention Committee. And Cybercrime Convention is the currently only international treaty that is specifically focused on cybercrime and electronic evidence. Currently, it has 70 state parties. So when you asked about what are the current threats or the offenses, I could maybe mention what our parties are stating as well. And one of the most dominant forms that is used to perpetrate cybercrime is ransomware. It is characterized, of course, by a strong seriousness. We know about some cases recently where hospitals were shut down, could not provide treatments to patients, so really, really serious. Then also state institutions were targeted, and one of our state party, Costa Rica, for instance, needed to declare state of emergency because its critical infrastructure systems were targeted. Hackers spent 14 months in Albanian government sites and then launched the ransomware. So really something that's critical. It's also very costly for companies. Some reports are that the more than $1 billion was the cost of ransomware in the previous year. We also see some new techniques such as ransomware as a service, so it's available to more and more perpetrators that are willing to launch such an attack. Then also maybe to discuss the artificial intelligence and maybe briefly to mention the generative AI aspects. And yes, of course, we will see maybe the impacts of it in the future, but certainly as these tools are used for content creation, it could be very useful for making a tailored phishing email that the perpetrators can use. So some are saying that AI is a social engineering on steroids because it really can help to produce some tailor-made emails. So not only some Cristiano Ronaldo posting you a message and asking for 1,000 euros because he wants to get out from the airport and losing his credit card, but really something that it's tailored to the needs and to every person and user. So maybe just to conclude on the importance of international cooperation, and we issued, Cybercrime Convention Committee issued a guidance note on the use of procedural powers and international cooperation powers. These may be used, we spoke about the cyber-dependent offenses now, but these can be used in relation to any type of offense, in relation to investigation of even murder, kidnapping, location data may be very relevant. And since the data are in possession and control of service providers in various jurisdictions, they play a key role in providing international cooperation and in gathering electronic evidence.
Thank you very much, Ian. Michael, you would like to prefer in French or in English?
Je préfère l'anglais, oui, c'est
okay,
facile.
In English. So we were talking about ransomware just before, and of course we cannot speak about international cooperation, cross-border cooperation with Europol without talking about Lockbit. We were discussing with Jean-Philippe Lecoux from Europol just before yesterday, and he was explaining us about these 10 countries working together to this, let's say, successful operation. Could you tell maybe some words about, and maybe some other successful cases you can share with us today?
Of course, yeah. I mean, by default, whenever we are supporting a case, because it's, I think from the get-go, it's clear it's important to indicate that we are always supporting. It's not Europol that does the full investigation, but it's the member states that do this. And we try to support them in whatever way we can. So that is like financial, operational, analytical support. By default, all the cases we support involve many countries. Simply, and I will come back to Lockbit in a second, but in general, we try to target infrastructure, we try to target the actors behind it, we try to target the cryptocurrency payments, and all of that is like woven across many countries. So you need all of these countries, you need their capacities, you need their legal framework, and you just need people on site to be able to intervene. And the same was the case in the Lockbit. So for example, and I'm cheating here, like looking at my cheat sheet, but we took down, and again, we is like the member states with support, of course, took down 34 servers across the world. There were like 14,000 rogue accounts, so these are like exfiltration accounts taken down, again, in different jurisdictions. There were 2 people arrested in different jurisdictions. What we did on our side, this has basically been going on since Lockbit emerged, and especially since they came on the forefront of ransomware, which was like 2022. So to give you an idea of what we do, for example, we organized 27 operational meetings in this operation, 4 operational sprints of like a week long, where the investigators come to Europol, work together on the data. So that is, I think, the first thing we do is getting the people around the table, make sure that they are aware of what everybody is doing, are coordinating their efforts, are exchanging the evidence they have, the data they have. We also have some highly technical support skills that we can offer, like cryptocurrency analysis on let's say, a world-class level. Also capabilities to see server infrastructure, for example. Logbit was definitely a great success, but if you look at our website, like the press releases, and again, we are highlighting there what the member states are doing. It's not the Europol show, but we have a lot of successful operations mentioned there. Another one, for example, last year was Genesis Market. They were selling basically identities, credentials of people on like a marketplace where it was like very easy for like €5 to buy somebody's credentials and then access their PC and abuse those credentials. Again, there, and this is something that has been going on, we also did this in Logbit actually, was to also have attention for the preventative aspect, so offender prevention, knock and talks in Genesis Market, for example, a lot of those have been done. So there were like 2 million identities being sold there. This operation, actually 17 countries cooperated, 119 arrests, 200 house searches, a lot of knock and talks. So you just basically cannot do this as the single country. They're not all in your country, that's the first thing, but also like the scale of things, you need many countries to cooperate on this.
And as there is no frontier in this digital world, of course the cooperation is one of the key to success, to fight against cyber crime. Could you tell us maybe one word about GCATE and how it works and the added value in this whole ecosystem?
For sure. So the JCAT is the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force. They are housed at Europol, but they are not they're not Europol staff. They are actually a group of liaison officers from many European countries, but also beyond. For example, we have several services from the United States there, Australia is there, Norway is there, Canada is there. So we have all of these liaison officers that are in the same room together, and that means that they can really closely cooperate, and I think they are the driving force behind many of these highlight operations, just because the fact that, well, of course, almost all of the countries that are really active fighting cybercrime are around this table. They can closely cooperate, so they can later do all of the administrative and legal prerequisites that are there, like an MLAT, but they can first exchange, talk to one another, see if it's useful to do all of the legal proceedings. And yeah, like I said, many of the highlight cases we have are JCAT cases, and then of course are supported by EC3, by the European Cybercrime Center, the best way we can.
Thank you very much, Michael. Marisol, je vous propose qu'on échange bien sûr.
Marisol, we're going to talk now about Canada. Michael just mentioned that Canada is one of the countries present in this cooperation ecosystem. And we know that because, of course, each year we come to Canada to talk about these things in Montreal. But who are the key partners with which you are cooperating today in cyber matters? And could you share some of the successes that you have had? Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with such impressive speakers. Thank you for the invitation. I work at the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, a federal organisation, the equivalent of the ANSSI in France. And in cybercrime, the key thing for us is to work on national resilience, and the creation of this centre really was a first step in this collaboration. And we became the operational authority for cybercrime for Canada, and our mandate has been extended not only to protect actively the networks and infrastructures of the Canadian government, but also to work with the essential infrastructures of the country to boost their resilience nationally. In terms of partnerships, this year, for example, we have been interacting with 1,400 essential sectors in France, from a figure of 1,000 last year, and there's also a critical role in integration and collaboration with the provinces and the regions and territories of Canada. We have 13 provinces, and municipalities with which we have to cooperate on resilience, because the roles and responsibility in cybercrime in Canada are shared between the different levels of government and also with the different federal levels. At federal level, we work very closely with national defense, with the Canadian Army, with the Canadian Mounted Police, which is important in cybercrime also in Canada. We also work very closely with we're part of the CST, which is the Telecommunications Security Center as well. And within that organization, there's a program which manages electromagnetic intelligence for Canada. Before this partnership is fundamental for us and also enables us to have international visibility of some threats which are perhaps less visible for some of our other partners, and that means that we can work jointly to provide advice on boosting resilience in Canada internationally. At the center, we are the CSIR. We take part in CSIRT America, and we have very close links with the Five Eyes: Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, and I'm missing one. I should remember. I think it's the UK. And so internationally, we have an environment of trust between these countries, which means we can collaborate very efficiently. Just to give you an example of collaboration, our services have cyber defense capacities, and we have world-class sensors in Canada. Just to give you an example, we shared these capacities with our partners in the UK, GCHQ, or the NCSI, and this enabled them to improve their work and to create and develop their own capacities operationally. And so for Canada, international cooperation is of critical importance to improve our own resilience, and we also work internationally to try to improve the situation for everybody. Thank you, Marisol, and we'll come back to the exchanges with the UN also, and the position of Canada on those discussions currently going on at the UN. Leonard Roland, if I turn to you now regarding this cooperation, we have understood there is an operational dimension, technological dimension. There's the public sector, the private sector, and the role of diplomacy, which is important. We have already talked about this a little yesterday. So today, what role is played by that diplomacy? What is your position today, and how can you act in this fight against cybercrime? And we'd also like to ask what tools or resources you have. Thank you very much for the question. A very relevant question, because we do often see intuitively what a police officer can do in the fight against cybercrime. The role of the diplomat is less clear. Roughly speaking, I would say we have two main scopes of action. The first is to negotiate treaties. That's the key to our work. And in the fight against cybercrime, there is the big treaty currently being negotiated at the UN on the fight against cybercrime. You can imagine at the moment negotiating a treaty at the UN with the current global situation. That's not easy. And it really is a fairly legal warfare situation, a hellish situation. I don't know if that's the right term, although some people are using those terms. At the UN, we're currently seeing states using subjects like the fight against cybercrime to try to undo the international system, dismantle or distort the international system, and subject it to their own authoritarian view. So our work is to try to prevent that happening, and to try to make sure that the international system remains effective to address these challenges. The second area is more down to earth, and it's that of capacity building. How can we help countries, internationally developing countries, or which perhaps don't have the same level of maturity in the fight against cybercrime as some of our countries have? For example, France is working with Slovenia to set up an excellent capacity building center for a center in Podgorica, a capacity building center in Podgorica, to train professionals in the area on the fight against cybercrime. Thank you, Leonard. And as you said, that brings us to the question of the treaty, of what's going on at the UN, to try to understand that. Perhaps, Jan.
About, of course, this Budapest Convention, we cannot talk about cooperation, international cooperation. We're talking about this, and especially the second additional protocol.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. When it comes to Budapest Convention, it provides for the substantive criminal provisions, procedural powers, and provisions of international cooperation. But since, let's say, maybe 2007, we have started facing a lot of challenges that were caused by cloud computing, when you suddenly didn't know where exactly the data is located. So new procedures, new tools, more effective tools, to already cumbersome mutual legal assistance were required to be found, and location was no longer relevant. What was relevant was possession and control of the data. They are in possession and control of a service provider, so that's why the protocol provides for this measure for direct cooperation with the service providers. And it took us 4 years to negotiate the protocol. It was open for signature in 2022. Not yet in force, but of course we are having a lot of capacity building activities, also relying on currently joint project with European Union called cyberspace that will help with implementation of this protocol in the EU countries, and just to really help us to achieve that it really will be enabler of cooperation, and that it will be implemented properly. And with that, we will rely also on cooperation with other actors, such as private partners, service providers, to do workshops and to engage in mutual dialogue, because direct cooperation involves their participation and their active engagement.
Michael, maybe one more point about this public-private partnership, which is crucial in this cooperation. Could you maybe add some points that Jan just started speaking?
From our side, for sure, we see a lot of value in public-private partnerships. Pretty much as old as EC3 is the European Cybercrime Center, which was started in 2013, are also our advisory groups. So we have 3 different ones. There's one on internet security, typically as cybersecurity companies. We have one with financial actors, and one with communication providers. So typically the telcos and the internet providers. Those advisory groups have different roles, so they can share their expertise, they can point us in the right direction in terms of what they're seeing, in terms of also strategy and what phenomena we should tackle. But recently, especially since the Europol regulation has been adapted to make it easier for us to directly cooperate with them, we are trying to operationalize this more as well, so that we can get actual input from them, because clearly they have, if you, for example, talking about the cybersecurity providers, the companies, they have great visibility depending on what role they play in the ecosystem, but they have either endpoints or they do investigations. So they have a lot of visibility into the cybercriminal ecosystem, and we would like to exchange the best we can with them, because at some point they can investigate, but they cannot go, they don't have the legal powers to go further than that, right? So they can identify some infrastructure, but they cannot go there and take a copy of the server and analyze it, or they cannot identify who owns this server and such. And so there we can liaise with law enforcement and go further. So again, we see a lot of value in our private partners, and we are trying even to build that to the next step where they can really contribute, and they already do, by the way, but still to like formalize that and to make sure that we have a good exchange of operational information that can lead to future successes.
Thank you, Michael. Alors, on va parler maintenant de cette...
We're going to talk now about this convention. Karine. So this resolution aiming to implement an international convention to fight more effectively against cybercrime. This initiative has elicited some sharp reactions from between the more liberal democracies and which are worried about this being misused in Russia. Since in 2019, Russia was promoting this convention. And so people are calling for vigilance as to the intentions of Russia or China, for example, or other states which might seek to set up an authoritarian management system. So, Karine, with you, could we perhaps, to try to understand better what the resolution is, what does it contain, in fact? It's true that this resolution was proposed by Russia, supported by China and a number of other countries, including Venezuela, Belarus, and North Korea, which supported a resolution which obtained a small majority to initiate international negotiations for a universal convention against cybercrime. And what's very interesting and perhaps counterintuitively, the Western countries, Western democracies, opposed this resolution. Why? Because, as the panelists have said, we already do have an excellent convention, the Budapest Convention. We have 70 states, not just in Europe, also in Africa, more and more South American states signing this convention, which is becoming more universal gradually. And so the fear is that if we have a new convention, there's a risk of a mismatch between the two conventions, or having competition between the two conventions, which might weaken the Budapest Convention. And this risk of undermining the Budapest Convention is all the more of a problem in that it's Russia here which initiated these discussions. And why Russia? Russia is a country which is considered as enabling cybercriminals to launch cyber attacks against other states. And Russia is well known as being a fervent opponent of the Budapest Convention. Russia obviously is seeking to harm the Budapest Convention. And also, as Leonard said, in this hellish situation, they are seeking, while pretending to defend a UN convention, to in fact use the fight against cybercrime to try to criminalize their opponents, journalists, for example, and to get international cooperation, enabling them to try to limit the freedom of expression in their country. Thank you very much, Karine. What is the situation today in the discussions and negotiations? We see that there is a sort of block forming with a certain number of countries opposing these discussions. Have we reached a dead end?
Négociations ne sont pas au point
The negotiations are not stalled, but of course, I'm speaking under the control of Lola. But I might tackle the big challenges of these negotiations.
Il y a eu quand même 7 sessions de négociations, de 2 semaines chacune, 5 intersessions. Les délégations ont énormément travaillé sur ce projet, même les délégations, je dirais, qui étaient...
So delegations have been working hard and long on these negotiations, and they've tried to find an agreement because this could be a good tool, a tool that might be used and might be compatible with cooperation with the Budapest Convention and the UN Convention. However, 3 challenges have to be taken into account. First of all, crimes, because crimes would be included in the convention. So if we find a compromise on that, on cybercrime, so crimes that cannot be committed without using information technologies such as illegal access to an information system that are at the core of the Budapest Convention, this would lead to a compromise between a consensus between the different states. Now, the differences are on the cyber-enabling crimes, which are crimes that could be committed without an information system, but are made easier through information systems, such as drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and so on. And it is on this topic that differences are happening, because in cyber enabling, many things could be included, and Russia wants to add to this list some crimes that go against, for example, freedom of speech, or extremism crimes, dissemination of information, harmful information. So when you see that the countries pushing for such an addition of crimes are Russia and China, it could be a bit worrying. Now, second item that might be leading to differences is the international cooperation aspect. What will be the compulsory cooperation within the convention? Will they have to share evidences only on defined crimes, or is this cooperation going beyond and not only about the crimes defined by a convention, but also targeted to other serious crimes? So there's this possibility that this convention would be extended to other crimes that would not be defined by the UN convention. Third big area of differences is the question of human rights protection. Will it be possible through this convention to develop rules that will ensure that authoritarian regimes will not be using this convention against fundamental rights? Thank you very much, Karine. In the human rights and the oppression is something that is really threatening, and activists in favor of human rights are worried about the situation. We're talking about freedom of the press, freedom of expression, for the journalists, for example. Lena, what do you think about this topic? I'm pretty sure you've been following these negotiations. What is the state of play? What's the stance of France on this topic? And at the end of the day, what are the actions that could be implemented? Maybe some have been already launched. What could be done for these negotiations to move forward, but in the right direction, I would say? First of all, I totally agree with what Karine just said. In order to better explain this topic, you have to understand the different viewpoints. So you have France and then other states, such as China and Russia. What do we want from such a tool? We want an international instrument that is efficient, effective, and useful for our investigation units through cooperation, because at the end of the day, we want to catch the criminals. Other countries, maybe, and Karine has mentioned that, maybe that there's a hidden agenda. Maybe they are not really trying to seek progresses in terms of cybercriminality combat, but maybe they are trying to, because we see, for example, that some countries are really safe havens for these criminal groups, but some countries might use these conventions to legitimate the control they have on their people and export even this approach to the rest of the world. This is why France and like-minded countries have opposed to the launch of the work on this new UN convention. Once the General Assembly decided that the convention discussions will start, we decided to contribute to the work. Of course, we want to work in favor of multilateralism, and once this first fight was lost, we knew that it was important, now that the negotiations have started, to try and orientate the discussions in the right direction. But still, we see the Budapest Convention has the gold standards in terms of cooperation, international cooperation, and guarantee for the human rights. So what's our stance on that? We want to stand strong. We will not let anything happen in two areas. So first of all, the definition of what is a cybercrime. So, for example, an opponent publishing something on the social media, something that is contrary to the regime, well, this is not cybercrime. That's it. We would agree to be a bit flexible about the questions that were defined in the Budapest Convention, but anything political should be excluded from the convention. Second area of interest for us. We want international cooperation as designed in the convention to be guaranteed, guaranteeing the human rights. And some countries that are not from our field and nor from the other party, the middle ground countries, if I may, do not think that data protection are an obstacle to international cooperation and may even make international cooperation possible. So if they want a efficient tool, they will need to accept our proposals. Now, the last point we were not able to find an agreement on, and it will be negotiated against during the next session. And so we think really the data protection is still to be discussed. Marisol, what's your point of view from Canada on these negotiations happening at the UN level? What is the stance of Canada on these discussions? I was talking earlier about cooperation in terms of cybersecurity, and I mentioned some international tools. When we're talking about international conventions such as this one, I think that people are gathering to find expertise and advice, and this is very interesting what we can hear today about the crucial challenges, and it's quite interesting to see that there's an interaction between the different international conventions that start having an influence on national laws in terms of cybersecurity. So it can give you an idea of the intentions of our partners in terms of cybersecurity and our interest in terms of cybersecurity.
Talking about UN negotiations, you agree with the key points?
Thank you very much. Well, it was interesting to hear what previous speakers said, and I must fully subscribe to their positions. And yes, the context is that the negotiations started, or the resolution was adopted on a proposal of Russian Federation. It was a contested resolution. Russian Federation submitted its old version of the convention, but we saw how throughout the negotiations the provision resembled more the Budapest Convention, more or less. So this is some kind of also a great PR activity for the Budapest Convention. We see that the Budapest Convention actually have this validation of states coming from all over the world. And during the negotiations, that's maybe a paradox for someone, but we received many requests for accession. So currently the convention has 70 state parties and 21 another states were invited to accede, and we received really a lot of requests for accession from countries coming from all over the world. So really, perhaps this convention can be to some extent also a bridge towards Budapest Convention. It doesn't contain tools that are in the Budapest Convention framework, more specifically that are in the second additional protocol. It has some elements, but what would be very much important is that it doesn't contain provisions that could affect the freedom of expression. And as Karine mentioned, those cyber-enabled offenses that were proposed, very vague terms, and those were clearly the risks. So it's important that the safeguards are built into the convention.
Thank you, Yann. Alors peut-être Karine, Léonard.
Thank you, Johan. Karine, you mentioned that you were quite optimistic on this question, and so Leonard mentioned the different steps to take next. So what can we expect from that? I see that Leonard has the microphone. You might want to start. Yes, so first, to be optimistic is part of the job. The challenges are very complex, and sometimes there's no alternative to being optimistic. So I would say that the first text that, as it was proposed, was going in the right direction. As our colleagues just said, we've worked a lot on that. We started from the proposal from Russia, and now we have, at the end of the day, a text that is closing on what could be or what is rather the Budapest Convention. So the real question will be to know if the countries that are against this vision are still ready to find a compromise on that. Now, for Russia, since it is an initiative coming from Russia, will not accept a failure on this convention. Indeed, Russia sometimes seems quite stringent. They do not want to accept compromise. But I think that during the last negotiation phase, they will accept consensus. Why? Because at the end of the day, they were the one pushing for this convention. So there's no interest for them for this convention to be a failure. So they would see it as a success if they achieve this convention. Also for China, let's recall that China has been supporting the convention, and it's quite interesting to see this interaction between China and Russia. We see that China takes the floor after Russia, saying that they're ready for compromise, and China has different reasons maybe, but they want this convention to be a success. Now, you have other countries that are closer to the Budapest Convention, so they agree to compromise, but this compromise has to be done without any harm against the Budapest Convention, nor a decrease in human rights protection. Do we know what would happen and what are the next steps in terms of the political agenda? It was supposed to be a process that would end at the end of last year. So the 7th session in December last year will be prolonged. So it will not be an 8th session, but we will just continue the last session in 2024. And it should be the final step, really. So final steps in 2024, so we'll continue to watch the space. Of course, another question for our panelists. We've been talking about some improvements, but of course, diplomacy has still a big role to play in order to find consensus and agreement. And we've recalled the importance of having safeguards and mechanisms, and to give maybe a framework to all these dimensions, such as legal work, regulation, and so what is the possibility to improve international cooperation. And I need to cycle back to national resilience that is supporting international resilience. In Canada, one of my colleagues made a presentation on our past in terms of regulations. And when we talk about international regulations, regulations in terms of cybersecurity, of course, we have to align our work at the national level. So we are trying to regulate on 4 major sectors in line with European countries, sectors that have been regulated. For example, France has regulated 5 of these sectors. And so Canada was really trying to align their work with what is being done at the international level. What's interesting with international cooperation is also the financial aspect, the evolution of technology, because it is a very fast-paced evolution and it is difficult to adapt. When we're talking about international development and we are receiving requests for capacity building, trainings, and so on, of course, we have to develop our understanding of the future needs to maybe fill this gap, to have the right resources, the right investments, the right talents. Because at the end of the day, this is a crucial challenge. We need to operationalize our common understanding. We're not talking only about something that is on paper, and this is the operationalization part that is maybe more difficult. I will now give the floor to the audience to ask some questions to our panelists. Just raise your hand. A microphone will be given to you. I see someone in the audience. So that's our wake-up call now. Any questions to our panelists?
Bien. Si, une question. Excusez-moi parce que avec les projecteurs, je vois pas très très bien dans la salle, donc...
Sorry, I don't see the room. Do we have a question? Alice de Beaupré, academics, from the academic world, a question for Mr. Hollande. You've talked about usefulness. This is a word I think you've used. So what will be the usefulness of the conventions that will be adopted for France? So when we talk about usefulness of these tools, it will depend mostly on our capacity to cooperate with the states that will be joining this convention but are not members of the Budapest Convention. So this will give us a minimum understanding ground with the states that are not members of the Budapest Convention. But for all the countries that are still members of the Budapest Convention, since this framework is going beyond and is more precise, I think this will remain the basis for the work, cooperation. Good morning, Yannick Hulte, I work for Thales. How can we, on the one side, have the international cooperation and on the other side have states that are supporting cybercrime? So how do you find a common agreement between these two opposing terms? How is it possible to work in such a space? Thank you. Michael?
I can say a couple things about that. So without going into the geopolitics, indeed, for us, the biggest bottleneck is not so much the legal framework, because the legal framework is there for some, and especially Budapest Convention and such, but it's indeed some, what we call unfriendly jurisdictions, right? Some states and areas of the world that are very difficult to cooperate with, or, even impossible. So how do we navigate this? I think what we do for one is not only go after the people that are behind the keyboard, because if you do that and they are in an unfriendly jurisdiction, it's end of story. But there are different ways to tackle this. So also going after the infrastructure, which is quite often in a friendly jurisdiction. For example, France has a great internet infrastructure, so they are quite often hosting some servers. Same goes for the Netherlands and such. So many friendly jurisdictions do cooperate with us and allow us access to the infrastructure, which gives us great insight. Again, we can take it down. We can get a lot of data that is useful for future investigations. So we also do that. We go after the cryptocurrency. So we don't only go after the people. And then even if the people themselves are right now unreachable, they can still be flagged, go on the flight lists and such. So if ever they travel, then, or ever they go to a friendly jurisdiction, then we can still try to apprehend them and follow up and try to get them sentenced. So it is indeed somewhat difficult, but I agree with you that for us the biggest hurdle right now is not the legal framework, but is more the fact that some jurisdictions are very difficult to work with.
Léonard, vous vouliez compléter sur...
Do you want to add anything on that?
With which the traditional mechanisms such as mutual legal assistance cooperation does not work properly. And here the diplomacy can also play a role. There are some instances, countries with which we are conducting what we call cyber dialogue, where we would bring around the table all the administrations involved in cyber in France and in the other country. And this kind of format is also a way to deliver some messages on the cooperation on cybercrime that would not function properly. So we are here as a door opener for other agencies in the government.
Marisol?
Au Canada, il y a aussi
In Canada, we also have infrastructure for equality that is very important in all the discussions and decision making at the international level. So agencies I've mentioned work together. They try to cooperate to understand better the opportunities and the threats. They try to implement missions, cooperation, different bodies. And without this cooperation, it wouldn't be possible to deal and handle the geopolitical context and the macro level. So it's a very important tool at the international level. We have another question from the audience. Good morning. what Marisol just said is very interesting as regards the cyber threats evolution. So how a well-written convention, how a comprehensive convention can be created at some point, updated rather.
Oui, en effet, c'est un...
Karine, do you want to answer that? And I think that maybe Jan will come back on the question of the Budapest Convention, because indeed it is important to identify crimes, and we should not define these crimes too precisely in order for the convention to keep growing, to keep evolving, because some crimes are not foreseen as of today. Tools are not foreseen as of today, but they might appear in the future. This is why we want definitions that are quite broad, in order to leave some space for evolution. Also, you can add protocols to a convention. So this is the second possibility. We can just add provisions to the convention following the different evolutions in the global context. But this convention is there to have some legal framework, but at the same time to be flexible. We want something that is flexible in time and can evolve.
Thank you very much. Actually, I would say it's an excellent question, because I can speak more about the philosophy of the Budapest Convention. Budapest Convention was adopted in 2001, and its substantive criminal law provisions are worded in a technology-neutral language. So what does it mean? In 2001, for instance, ransomware as such was not that much present, but the provisions, substantive criminal law provisions like illegal access, illegal interception can be interpreted, and actually the guidance notes that are adopted by the Cybercrime Convention Committee just provide for more information how the provisions of the convention may be used to cover those threats as you name them. And for instance, maybe last point, when there were discussions what should be in the second additional protocol, the discussions went that actually we do not need any new substantive criminal law provisions, and what is needed are more procedures how to get to the electronic evidence. Therefore, the direct cooperation with the service providers in another jurisdiction was an avenue to explore more. So therefore it provides for emergency procedures and other procedural tools. But when it comes to substantive criminal law, we use very neutrally worded language.
Thank you, Ian. Alors, nous avons une autre question et ensuite une devant.
One last question and then a question in the front of the room. So good morning, Benedict Stage. I'm a translator and interpreter and expert in geopolitics and cybercrime. My question is to Mr. Roland. So the support to this project, is it in line with the traditional approaches or stances of the countries? So, for example, the liberal democracies such as Turkey and Hungary have a certain position on these topics. So how do they deal, and what is the opinion on this convention? I would say that we can observe some kind of solidarity from all the Western democracies, NATO, EU, on these topics. So all these states are also totally convinced that it is necessary to have an operational and strong convention that can guarantee fundamental rights. Now, allow me to circle back to your profession. Of course, the stakes are at the center of this convention. We need to talk about linguistic agreements. When we talk about cybercrime, for example, Russia does not use this terminology, and it might mean something different. So this is very important to understand each other when we want to implement this tool. And France played a very important role because we have a working group on a linguistic concordance. It will be key in finalizing the work on the convention. Thank you, Leonard, and we will take one last question. Good morning, and thank you for your presentations and opinion. I organize at Schneider Electric some cybercrime workshops. So we've understood quite well the importance for cooperation between countries, and yesterday there was a panel that said that we will have in 2024 half the world going to elections, United States and other countries. Do you see this as a threat to international cooperation? Yes, indeed, 60% of international GDP will vote in 2024. This can make everything change, most of all with democracies that are endangered in some part of the world. Marisol. At the Cyber Center, of course, we are involved in supporting our democratic system. That's why we want cyber defense to be implemented. We want information to be well controlled. So it is really an important challenge. Leonard, do you want to say something? Karine, maybe? Indeed, it is a fundamental moment. I remember that 50% of the planet will vote, 60% of the world GDP. So we're talking about the election year, really, and there could be threats to destabilize the system through cybercrimes. We've seen that during in 2017, 2016. So we are prepared. We've been talking about this, cooperating with other European states. We know what the threat is. We are trying to explain our vision on the threat, and also we exchange good practices, how to prevent cyber threats. And we show solidarity. For example, the UK talked about cyber attacks that they received, and that they could be there to go against election stability. And so the UN said clearly, we are supporting the United Kingdom in this fight. So this is also a reason for international cooperation. Karine, do you want to add something on this topic? Indeed, and it's quite interesting. This is an election year at the global level. And so it would be very complex to understand what are the cyber attacks against the election process, other cyber attacks that might try to use this electoral fragility, because a lot of attacks are just opportunistic attacks. So we could have a combination of both and have a lot of cyber attacks in the months to come. Thank you very much for answering all the questions of the day, and I think we understood it quite well. International cooperation is happening, and it's one of the pillars in the fight against cybercrime. It is not the panacea, but it can be built upon a lot of important tools, international tools, stakeholders that are trying to move forward, and we see that some improvements, such as the Budapest Convention, can be questioned. And so nothing has to be taken for granted. Everything can be questioned at some point, and I would say that I take from that there's a lot of optimism. We've been talking about actions that do bring about results, and so this gives us a great example of what we can do. There is still a lot of work to be done. We should be cautious, but I think that it was very interesting to see how you dealt with these topics. The challenges at hand are impressive. Thank you very much for sharing your experience, your expertise. Thank you very much to all the people in the audience. It was a pleasure to be with you. And of course, at INCYBER, we will keep working and discussing during the rest of the day. So we will meet again. Thank you very much for being with us.